So I'm gonna narrow my focus on the things I can control. I'm gonna tune the things up that I can't. I know they're there and I know they're scary, and I'm gonna take action anyway.
That's it.
And then it works.
That's the secret right there.
That's the secret sauce right there.
Hey there, I'm super excited to share with you a new success interview from my Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. And if you have followed my podcast for any length of time, I first say thank you. But you also know that I only bring you the best of the best. We're talking thought leaders, best-selling authors, celebrities, professional athletes, and leaders of companies that are changing the world. And today was no different. It was my privilege to interview Carey Lohrenz.
My passion and my mission to help you unleash your greatness within. My heart goes out to the underdogs that's on their way. If you think you can go from good to great, okay, let's motivate. GreatnessWithin.com. CJ Hoisington. GreatnessWithin.com.
You see, Carey has an amazing story. She is the United States Navy's first female F-14 Tomcat fighter pilot. Wow, I felt like being able to visit with her in this interview that I had the fortune of spending some time around greatness. Why? Because here's someone who cut a path, who was an outlier, and now is an example to many others around thinking out of the box. And now she spends her time doing leadership consulting. She's written a book. It became a national bestseller titled Fearless Leadership, High Performance Lessons from the Flight Deck. And she also has a new book that will be coming out in 2021 titled Span of Control. And let me tell you something, in this interview, no matter where you're at on the leadership rung, the principles we talk about in this interview can have an immediate impact if you'll apply the principle. I can promise you that. Anyway, let me tell you, if you're watching this on my YouTube channel, then hey, I invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and make sure that you click that notification bell so that you're the first to be notified when I come out with a new success interview or motivational message. And if you haven't subscribed to my podcast on Apple Podcast, I invite you to do so. All right, without any further ado, let's jump right into this interview.
Carey, welcome to the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast.
Hello, I'm glad to be here.
It's great to have you. The Navy's first female F-14 Tomcat fighter pilot I have on the Greatness Within podcast. How exciting is that? It's awesome to have you on the show.
Thank you. We'll have fun today.
Oh, I think we will. I feel that. And so let's jump into it. And the way that I like to begin all my interviews is ask the guests to share some of their backstory. I think that will give some good insight into some of your story and then probably some of the principles that we talk about. So why don't you share with us your story?
Perfect. So yeah, it's kind of interesting because obviously this was a bit of a unique vocation. So people, when they discover this, we all want to know the path, right? We want to know the path of how people ended up wherever they are. But I was pretty fortunate. I think I knew always from the beginning that I was going to be an aviator. I think it was in my blood. My dad was actually a Marine Corps pilot. My mom was a flight attendant or a stewardess, as they used to be called back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I have an older brother that's also involved in naval aviation and then was in the Air Force as well. But so he and he's just a year older than me.
Mm-hmm.
So we grew up playing with all of my dad's helmets and maps. And we flipped over his bar stools that he brought back from Japan and, pretended like we were, these great aviators. So at some level, I think I knew that I always was going to be involved in it. But what was fascinating, I grew up in Green Bay, which is just about an hour and a half north of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, which is where they have one of the world's biggest air shows, EAA. And every year my dad would take us down there and he'd meet with some of his friends, some of his former military friends. And only on occasion would I see female pilots. So it was fascinating because even though I was exposed to it and I was interested in it, I didn't necessarily see a path forward. And so as I got a little bit older, of course you get a little more resistant to things your parents say you might be interested in. Yeah. But I was familiar with the WASPs as well. And the WASPs were the women Air Force service pilots who flew almost 2 million hours in the 40s to help us with our World War II effort. They flew all of the airplanes, they did training, towing, all of this stuff. But then you didn't hear about them again. And nobody talked about them.
Yeah.
And again, there weren't any women, really very few women in aviation. So I didn't necessarily think that it was going to be an available path for me, but I had it in the back of my mind. So as I was going through college and, you get to that decision-making point of, what are you going to do? Where do you want to go? And I mentioned it to my dad and I said, I still think I would want to do this. And he was like, you know what? You should go for it. Because it's one of these things that if you don't do it when you're younger, you can't go back and try to be a military pilot when you're 28, 29, 30 years old, right? Mm-hmm. So you kind of only get one crack at it. So there are only 3 ways you can become a Navy pilot. You either go through the Naval Academy and earn a flying commission. You go through an ROTC program at any college in the country, and then hopefully get a flying spot out of that. Right. Or you do what I did, where you're just a regular college graduate. So you might be an aerospace engineer, Parks and Rec major, or like me, I was actually a psychology and social work double major. Oh. So I applied to the Aviation Officer Candidate School program, and it's a 16-week metamorphosis taking you from earning your commission or from being a college graduate to earning your commission and then going to flight school. So that was the path that I had to take to try to get that to be a possibility. So a little bit different maybe than some, but about a third of how we get our aviators in the Navy.
So what message, maybe I'm jumping way ahead here. Maybe I'm jumping to the conclusion of this interview, but in the sense that this question, what message would you have for every young girl, or it could be a boy, right? But they have this goal out there that is audacious. It's big. There's no pathway already set up to follow in your case, right? What message would you have for them? Because you were an outlier, if you will.
Right. So you know what, for young women or girls, and this does still apply to men and boys as well.
For sure.
But don't wait for an invitation to make a difference. I think that is one of my messages. Do not wait for an invitation to make a difference. I think too often, and particularly with women and even high-performing women, and you definitely see it now with younger women and girls, we tend to think that our performance will speak for itself, or that as long as we perform well, or maybe we're trying to risk manage something to not make any mistakes, we think we're going to be noticed, and we think that people are going to invite us to the party, if you will. And you know what? I have a few more years of experience under my belt now, and that's simply not true. Yes, your performance matters. Yes, you have to be willing to take that first step. But in order to achieve anything of note, or something even that is significant to you, whatever that may be, you cannot wait for an invitation to make a difference, because it simply is not going to come. So under that umbrella as well, though, the ideas of, what I've kind of netted down my life's to work and life lessons to, even with fearless leadership, is that you have to have courage and tenacity and integrity. Those are 3 really, really profound personal traits and performance traits, high performance traits that I've found with my work, not only in the military and across all military endeavors, but for the last 15 years, I've worked with, the Forbes Global 2000, Fortune 10, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. And those are underlying principles that you will not find any high performer not have those.
Love that.
You can't get to this level without having those 3 basic, but not always easy characteristics or traits.
Okay, so we're going to jump into those principles, because when I went through your book, Fearless Leadership, powerful book, love the stories, but the principles are sound. And that's the key that I think you need. This is really powerful. And by the way, you have a new book that will be coming out possibly next year called Span of Control, I think, right? Is that right?
Yes, sir. That's it. Super excited about that as well.
So I might have a question about that, because you said this in the book. You said, cruising through the impenetrable blackness at roughly 350 miles per hour, the aircraft carrier seems about the size of a discarded postcard stamp.
Yeah.
And I have to land on it, you said. Give the audience a little scenario of the under pressure scenario that you had to deal with. And maybe I'll have a follow-up question with that. So give us a little bit of the kind of the visual of that.
So it's kind of crazy because oftentimes people don't even, and just because there's not a lot of familiarity with it, people don't think through the difference between what Navy and Marine Corps fighter pilots do and other people, right? The rest of aviation. Because what's really unique about both the Navy and Marine Corps fighter pilots is that we are the only fighter pilots in the world who will actually dare to land high-speed fighters on aircraft carriers at night. Nobody else will do it.
Okay.
They'll land helicopters at night, but they will not land any sort of fighter at night. And from a perspective, context, if you will, if you can imagine, most commercial aviation or other military services, you generally have 8 to 10 or 10 to 12,000 feet of runway to land on. When we're coming aboard that aircraft carrier, it's not even 300 feet of landing space that we have. And one of the things that we have to do, especially when we're landing at night, is that if you can imagine for a second that you go into your closet, right? And you close the door. So I'm going to assume your closet doesn't have a window in it unless you're super bougie.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Lucky for you, you have a window. Yay. And you put a blindfold on, and then you put another blindfold on, and you sit down in a chair and you spin around and try to do your job. Right? It's so incredibly, the depth of the lack of sensory perception or field of perception that you have is unlike any other. When you go, for example, if you go, once you get out to about 300 miles offshore, you don't have any ambient light. There is no light pollution.
So it is dark. It is just
black. Dark. So you can go up onto that flight deck, put your hand out in front of you, and you physically cannot see your hand. Unless there's a moon, then you can see it. But if there's no moon that night, you're like wobbling your hand around because you're like, oh, I don't see it.
Right.
Now, the challenge in this from an execution or a flying perspective and even a fear perspective is that all of us have seen, particularly if you are based on the West Coast of the US, you go around the world and you operate in the Western theater. So you end up operating in some of the world's most dangerous sea states. So oftentimes the back end of that aircraft carrier can be up and out of the water 35 to 40 feet. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but when you realize on a normal approach coming into the aircraft carrier that you only have about 6 to 8 feet of clearance, you now have yourself an angles problem, right? And all of us have seen during the day the back end of an aircraft carrier up out of the water with the propellers whipping above the waterline, and the guys on the deck are like, hey, you're looking good, keep it coming. And you're like, oh, today's the day I'm going to die, right into the meat locker.
Yeah.
Sunny and 75, and everyone's going to see it. So you don't forget that vision. You don't forget that visual at night when they say, hey, the deck's moving, just keep coming, because you know it's coming up to grab you, but you just can't see it. So everybody, all the aviators who have spent any time in the barrel or in pitching deck conditions will be able to tell you, and everybody responds physiologically a little bit different to extreme fear. Some people sweat a lot. Some people get a really extremely dry mouth. Some people shake. Some people get sick. Some people get sick coming out the other end. But everybody has tasted that fear. It's palpable. And the only way you can get better at doing that at night is to show up again and again and again. Yeah. And it never gets easy, but it gets more manageable. and and you learn how your body is going to respond. You learn if you're the one who gets the dry mouth. You learn if you're the one who has to do shoulder rolls, because different than almost any other job, when it comes to that fear response and that paralyzing fear of failure, we can't do jumping jacks. We can't stretch. We can't run away. We can't do something physical
to shake up the system.
That's right. That's right. So whether it's athletic endeavors, or oftentimes, and I do, about 100 events a year, I'll see even some executives they get really nervous, before they go on stage. So they're, maybe they might be doing push-ups or toe raises, right? You've seen it. They're doing something to move their body. When you are in a G suit and a torso harness, you don't have that. So you got to figure it out. So it's something that is a very unique environment that you have to work through, both the intellectual capacity of problem solving, at 400 miles an hour, slowing down to 250, stuff changing, things that you don't have control over, and just the physical nature of your body struggling to see, even though it can't see, but it wants to see. So all of your senses coming into play. Yes, the whole thing it's magical, it's scary, it's exciting, and it's a good thing to have done.
I get it, but I can't help but ask, what was your experience the first time you had to do that? It's one thing to do it your second and third time, but the first time, you've heard all the horror stories. You wrote about it in your book in the introduction about the 1994, I believe it was, crash that happened. So I'm imagining you have all kinds of things going through your system, and now it's your turn to do it.
Well, I'll tell you what, full disclosure, and as you alluded to, I wrote the opening of my book kicks off with a pretty colorfully sort of gruesome story about a friend of mine who actually ended up hitting the back of the ship, hitting the ramp on one of his first passes. So in the F-14, before you get to that, when you're in intermediate and advanced flight school, you actually do get to go out to the aircraft carrier in a trainer, but you don't have anybody in your back seat. But it's daytime. So for us, the very first time we see the back of the ship, or we do a nighttime landing, an aircraft carrier landing, we have no instructor, it's you, and it's dark. So the very first time in the F-14 is one of the most challenging aircraft to land for a lot of science reasons and aerodynamic reasons, but it's heavy. It's in a bad power band when you're coming aboard. So there's a very, very little room for air simply on the engine spool up. So I get so excited about this. I'm sorry if you're listening to this and you're not.
Maybe it's just you and me, but I dig this stuff. I grew up by the way, I grew up in the military, so I kind of know that world. I didn't ever work in the military, but
yeah. So from a performance perspective, it's cool because you're already behind the power curve, so to speak, out of the gate trying to land this airplane.
Right.
And unfortunately, when I went in my training squadron, when I went to the ship for the first time, like I said, that the Tomcat is notoriously difficult to land, and it has over a 50% disqualification rate trying to qualify the first time. Okay. So over 50% of people fail the first time. So we're going out to
sorry. So when you fail, right, that first time you go, if someone did, if they failed, does that mean they ejected and they crashed?
Oh, no, that's a good point. No, it just means that for whatever reason, your grades weren't quite good enough for them to go, okay, you get to go to the fleet. Or maybe you didn't get aboard at all, whatever the case may be. So it's called a disqualification. And generally speaking, everybody gets to go back for a second try, probably 3 weeks or a month later. Okay. And sometimes it takes people a third time to do it. But the Tomcat in particularly has a much higher disqualification rate.
Got it.
The very first time. So in my class, when we went, as per statistically relevant, if that's a thing, half of us disqualified. I came in that first time, that deck was moving. I didn't even touch the deck. Somehow I was a little high and we had gotten pushed back and back. And I think it was 2:30 in the morning. And I didn't even touch the deck.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, God, it happens, right? Not my proudest moment. I was so shell shocked by it. So, and I know we are bouncing around, but golly, that gets me
No, no, no.
excited.
But hindsight. You're a little older now from that time,
Yeah,
probably. So you think about it, that's a message for everybody that the first time you go attempt something that's difficult or you've never done it before, and it's out of your comfort zone, and your emotions are going into freak out mode, right? Anxiety, tension, feedback, and you
mhm.
don't you have to go around again, give it a shot.
That's right. Yeah. And until you do it, people think, oh, that'll never happen to me. And it's not that I didn't think it would happen to me.
Right.
I just didn't think it would happen to me.
Right, right, right. It's funny how the mind
And
plays games, right? Yeah.
right, right, because you can't go into it thinking I'm going to be the one to fail. If you start flying defensively, if you start doing anything
Mm,
defensively, convinced that you're guaranteed to fail, self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You're going to fail. So, but because of when I actually went out to the ship, the ship was already, they were behind schedule. Everything, was behind. So when I didn't get aboard on that first pass, and because it was so late, they were like, yep, you're going to have to come back. Not that it was spectacularly ugly. We just didn't have the time. So, but you asked what it was like the very first time. It was, people can tell you that it's disconcerting, that you lose all of your senses. The senior guys can tell you your legs are going to shake, or hey, don't, it's going to be intimidating. Don't worry. We've all thrown up. We've all done this. And you're like, yeah, I've got that. But until you actually experience it,
for sure.
you hope that all of your training gets you to the point where in that first time you're able to perform flawlessly. But there are situations where that simply is not going to be the case, right? So what do? You go back and you train, and you try to very quickly debrief, and you figure out what worked, what didn't, so that next time you're like, all right, I know I'm going to feel like the bottom of the world's falling out away from me. I literally now understand what it's like to be pitch black with not being able to tell up and down. So I'm going to narrow my focus on the things I can control. I'm going to tune the things out that I can't. I know they're there and I know they're scary, and I'm going to take action anyway.
That's it.
And then it works.
That's the secret right there.
That's the secret sauce right there. That is the high performance secret sauce. It is being able to, regardless of what's happening external to you, those things you can't control, it's not that you tune them out so you're not aware of them.
Yes.
You have to be aware of them, but you're not fixated, and you're not trying to give your attention equal access to those things you can't control. So it's bringing that focus down, bringing that filter down. And we always, generally, and I know you speak with tons of high performers, but being from a military family, you probably heard keep it simple, right?
Yeah.
We always keep it simple in 3 things. And even when we're working in these really chaotic, super sophisticated environments, when you start getting down to that last quarter of a mile, inside half a mile, quarter of a mile, it's 3 things. That's it. It's not 30 things. So you're relying on your training, and then you're only focusing on 3 things, so that if you get those 3 things right, success should be, I hate to say guaranteed, but you've taken out everything else that you can even control. So your chances of success are much greater once you get to that point. So
what are the 3 things? Remind us what the 3 things are.
So once, for us personally, from a landing perspective,
Right.
Once you get inside of that half mile, we call it meatball lineup angle of attack. So it's controlling, understanding visually where you are, whether you're high or low.
Right.
Lineup, right? Because it doesn't matter if you're landing on speed. If you're 10 feet to the right, you're going to take out a bunch of people on a bunch of airplanes. So you have to get the lineup right. And angle of attack is just the pitch of your airplane, because again, different than if you've flown commercially or other airplanes in the military, you want to grease the landing, right? You want to be able to hold a drink in it, not be disrupted. But when you're landing on an aircraft carrier, it's critical that that your tail doesn't move, your tail hook, because if you bump the nose down at all, it lifts the tail hook up 10 feet or 12 feet, whatever it may be. And then you're not going to snag a wire and you're going to go back around again.
Yeah, right.
It's those three things, right? So once I'm in those last 10 seconds, 8 seconds, if we're on fire, then either somebody else is going to eject or we're just going to ride that fire right into the deck. But those three things, unless I hear somebody say eject, that's all I'm focused on. And that's how I'm going to achieve or execute a successful landing.
Love it.
So.
Okay, let's do this. We went long on that.
Yes,
and
sorry. I know. Sorry about that.
Don't be sorry. I encouraged it, so I apologize. But I find it really interesting. So that was a little personal desire of mine to hear more of the background on that. And there's a lot of subtle principles in there. Okay, let's shift gears. Let's talk about leadership. Let's do it bullet point style. Listen, I read your book. I have 8 pages here. Bullet, right? So we won't be able to get through all of it, but just know that we're going to go through a couple things. So the first one is on courage. You say, acknowledge that leadership isn't a gift. Ooh.
Yeah, for sure. I think that people need to understand that personal development and leadership development is going to be something that you have to take ownership of and be responsible for. And that courage, because it's that flip side of fear, is going to be that first vital element to fearless leadership. And if you can cultivate courage in yourself, then you'll end up having what it takes to see limitless possibilities, and be able to see the opportunities in the future that will also allow you to tamp down some of those voices, either external or internal, that are telling you that you're not worthy of that journey. But without having the courage and developing a sort of why not me attitude paired with the desire and the commitment to do the work to get better, that will get you on that leadership journey.
I would suggest that the higher the vision and living in alignment with your purpose, the feelings of fear are reduced where courage becomes easier, right? It's easier for me to do the hard thing and I'm going out of my comfort zone. I'm just thinking back in my career and so forth. Because my vision was so strong, it reduced the fear associated that if I didn't have the vision's what carried me through, right? The purpose is what's carried me through.
Right.
The purpose is what drove me with the discipline to work hard when no one was looking, to do the training, the development, and so forth, so that I was prepared the moment that situation arose.
Absolutely. So for everybody, purpose will be your anchor. Whether you're trying to execute on an individual level, you're running a team, you've been running teams for 15 years, 20 years, purpose has to be your anchor. Out of all of the research that tries to look at what are those levers, what are those things that can consistently drive high performance, because we're looking for consistency in this, right? And consistent greatness, not just a one
shot in the arm. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Because that's, yay for you, but now what? Right. So, but purpose is your anchor. Teams and people who understand what their purpose is, that is the single greatest determining factor on whether or not you will stay relevant and stay at an elevated performance level longer than anybody else. If you're muddy on that, or if you're unclear on that, I have to highly encourage you to take some time on this. And by purpose, that doesn't mean the soft, fluffy feeling of, I'm not sure what job I want to have. I'm looking to find my purpose, right? If you're a farrier, right? If you're putting horseshoes on, it's understanding that why the work you do matters, because what could happen, right? The rest of it is the tactics of it. So it's not whether it's the kumbaya, great, I'm living a purpose-driven life type of thing. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But it's that purpose has to be your anchor, and the power in being able to cleanly and clearly articulate your purpose is that when you understand what your purpose is and your team understands what their purpose is, then they can focus on what matters.
That's right.
Because that purpose allows you to focus. and your focus is power. And when you dilute your focus, when you're trying to do all of the things, you dilute your power. And the best you can hope for is average at best.
Love it. Well said. Woo! I love that. So that makes me think, as I've worked with companies and so forth, one of the things that I teach, and I believe you obviously teach the same thing, because I saw on your Instagram a little video you did, and I thought, okay, I got to bring this up. How does someone be a leader without a title? Because I'm coaching my clients, right? And it goes back to purpose, right? If you are sharing the purpose of the organization, if you have bought in to the idea that the company, why the company exists and what it stands for, then it is on you. And we can go several places here. Wingman comes to mind, right? Your little section on, anyway.
Yeah.
So leadership without a title, your thoughts on that?
So what do you think about that?
I think there comes a moment. Here's what I actually wrote down after reading your book. Every single person has the ability morally to be a leader, whether they have the authority or not. That if you're in alignment with the values and the purpose of the organization, and you see something that needs to be said, or you see something that isn't working right, or there is a better way, you cannot allow your fear of not stepping on someone's toes or being an insubordinate toward a leader or something else get in the way from doing what's the greater purpose, the greater cause of the organization. And in my experience, I know you have something to say. I see it. This is good.
No.
In my experience, I have met people who I've learned later was that person. The person that wasn't in the role of leadership, but everybody respects them because they were willing to stand up and be a person of integrity and a person of courage to do the right thing when the right thing was probably hard sometimes. Thoughts?
That's right. No, I agree. And so I think for me, I think one of the biggest ways if you want to use even a metric or a scale, or how do you look at that, is leading without a title. I believe the strength and part of that as well. And one of the biggest things is leading by example. And that we all know people who have very grand titles or who have achieved high levels in rank, and yet they don't lead with integrity. They don't lead, I'll say authentically, which again, if you are going to say integrity matters, or you're going to say your team matters, or countless times we've heard people say, my people are so important to me. As you find out, I'm not going to drop names, but anybody can do any research in the last 2-3 months. There have been several companies that even through this pandemic have filed for bankruptcy. And at the same time they're doing that, days before they do it, they've paid out tens of millions of dollars of payouts to their exec team. They've filed for bankruptcy, and now they're still getting millions of dollars. And
they're asking employees, as you gave examples in Fearless Leadership, the book, where they have asked employees to maybe take an 8% cut in their pay while not telling the masses, the people, that they're going to do this on the side and put some extra money in the trust to pay bonuses to the executives.
Right. The whole golden parachute. And I know I coach a lot of executives. I work with executives. I work with the C-suite. I'm not sharing a position or the way I feel about it any different than I would with a room full of, 500 Fortune 500 top execs. I think that when people are doing that, it is definitely leading with their title and capturing what they can, which then discourages people who could have good solutions, who could have great input, because then they think they don't have any power.
That's right.
So,
and through that, you've shut those people down. They're no more those frontline workers that had the potential and had the vision and wanted to get behind. You've lost the trust, and now they're not giving their all, and now the company suffers because of it.
That's right. And then, what do we have? We have, almost any state HR association, or you look at even the head, SHRM, they can show you we've got about a 70, and things might be different now in the last even 3 to 4 months. But generally speaking, we in the US run at about a 70 to 80% worker disengagement rate, which is mind-blowing to me, because that is 100% a leadership failure. That is not on those people. That is not on the managers who are disengaged or the directors or the frontline service worker. That is 100% a leadership failure. And it blows my mind that we've settled into this complacent space, because imagine if you were able to inspire the people who you work with and work for to show up a better version of themselves, to feel like they are valued, to feel like they are invested in. What we could accomplish as a country and organizationally.
So what do you see? What do you see inside organizations with leaders, right? You talk about doing walkarounds. You talk about getting out with your people, communicating with them, building relationships. Because here's what we know about leadership is that if you don't have any followers, you're not a leader.
Well, yes, and you may get a group of followers that ends up being very damaging.
Yeah, 100%. Right.
So I know I'm splitting hairs a little bit on that, but then what can happen via industry, team, organization, whatever the case may be, is that you can so solidly shift going down a path that is going to be very difficult to get back on course. So some of the companies that I've worked with, and oh gosh, I'm so grateful and so blessed to have worked with some phenomenal leaders.
100%, right.
There are people who, and I've known for 14, 15, 16 years that started off over here and now they're up here. And they are the exact same personality and person with the same value set that they were 14 years ago or 12 years ago. Now, from an execution perspective, the skills are different. The time that they spend is different. Right. But when all of a sudden you see, and I've got a couple of people even in mind, I see them on site at a big event with, 2,000-3,000 of their employees. They're still in the hallway, hands in pockets, shaking hands, laughing, asking people, how are they? What do you need help with? Do you feel like you're resourced enough? Don't give me the happy smiley thing. Tell me what you really need. Yeah. They ask about their kids. They ask about their dogs. And they're actually invested in those teammates, those associates, as people, not just as a profit center.
Love it. Love it. And that has to do with authenticity. Mm-hmm. It has to do with being human, treating people with respect, right? You're a frontline worker, and then you make it to management or maybe a supervisor, and you don't change too much, but then you make it into a higher level of leadership, and all of a sudden pride sets in, and then you change. And so it's great to hear when we run into people that have been consistent because they have core values, they have core beliefs, they value their people. And you've been fortunate, just like I have been, those leaders that love the people, that believe in the people. I remember TJ Watson, this was shared in a couple different books I've read, that TJ Watson, the founder of IBM, would make it a habit of going down to the frontline workers and take a checkbook with him and then write a check for $15 when he'd hear that a job was well done or something else was well done. And come to find out, some of the research showed that many of those checks were never cashed. Why? Because those people saw those checks as, right, a piece of recognition that they did a job well done. You don't have to give people $15 to tell them they've done a job well done. Most people are not just getting the little attaboy, the little attagirl, just saying, nice job on that. I noticed the effort, even when the end result didn't create the result we wanted. Yeah. Still rewarding the effort has power.
That's right. And I think, a lot of people have hopped on board reading Carol Dweck's book, Mindset.
For sure. Right.
Right. And they're talking about growth and they think, oh, I just need to be willing to make mistakes. But actually part of the lesson in all of that, and when you look at even other pieces of her research, which nets out across the board with other value or attention-based research, is that it's when people have done the work and you recognize that work that is so much more valuable than just the outcome. right?
That's
So,
right.
and we're so instant. We're so wired right now with everything on our phones and social. And if people don't see the likes, they take posts down. If they don't get
Critical. Yeah.
comments on a blog, they erase it or they delete it, or,
That's right.
they did one thing well and nobody noticed. So now they're going to sit like this, right?
Right.
This is a bit of a roundabout story, but it's fascinating. One of the sports figures, my kids, if they were going to listen to this, would probably roll their eyes. But I'm a big JJ Watt fan.
Oh yeah.
I was out of the gate. He's from Wisconsin. I went to Wisconsin, and my dad played football at Wisconsin and all of that. But his whole family is steeped in such a culture. They have such a good work ethic.
Yes.
And years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago, I saw his mom be interviewed. And she was talking about at some point in college when things weren't going well for him. He hadn't come to Wisconsin yet, and he came home for a summer and was lazing around, not doing anything. And she was like, I'm not going to be the only one working. You need to get a job. And so he got a job delivering pizzas. And then you fast forward to, I think it was 2 summers ago, Hard Knocks, HBO Hard Knocks profiled the Houston Texans. And there's one little 45-second interchange there where he's, of course, it's hotter than all get out down there. And he's standing on the sidelines, and a rookie comes up and is talking to him. And he's like, oh man, you're doing so good this year, and things just seem kind of different, but you're really consistent. How do you do this? And JJ said, I studied all of these high performers. And what I realized in reading about them was that they stopped doing everything that didn't help them get better, and that they weren't just practicing for the sake of practicing. They were being very intentional. So this summer, he goes, every day I went to bed at 8:00. And when I showed up for 6 a.m. practice, I didn't just show up. I was ready to work hard. And the rookie's kind of spinning his helmet, and he looks at him and goes, I don't know, man. I don't think I can do that. That doesn't sound like any fun. And he looks at him and he goes, yeah, it's not.
Yeah, exactly. It's not.
But it's that ability to even understand as a leader, and he's clearly in a leadership position, that combination of hard work and that you're not going to be acknowledged at every step, particularly if you are in a leadership position, but you always have to be turned around, bringing people with you and pointing out when they're doing a good job to even emotionally incentivize them to keep showing up.
The old autocratic leadership style doesn't work. The new one is we see people doing good, we reward them. Doesn't mean you have to do anything monetarily to do that. It just means notice it and then call attention to it, and then share that effort with other people, inspires others. We talked about courage. We talked about authenticity. Yeah. So I wrote something down. What's your definition in general of authenticity? Because I wrote down there's a fine line between striving to improve and become something you're currently not, like excelling in a particular area or a particular skill. I call it act as if in the moment, and being authentic. And I think you can act as if, because the biggest room in the world is the room for improvement. You can act as if in the moment to be better, but still be authentic at the same time. Do you have any thoughts around the definition of being authentic?
So I did cover it a little bit in my book, but I will tell you, even since then, I think my perspective might be even a little fuller since then. Okay. And that, honestly, it's a word that drives me nuts because I think it's so overused. And I also think it's spectacularly abused because it has been pushed out there so hard in different books, journals, whatever, in the last 5 to 10 years. People think that, you just have to be authentic, just be authentic, and just be you. That's opened up the door to a lot of people being complete jackwagons.
That's right. Because if you say, well, I am what I am, that's authentic. Well, who are you, Popeye?
That's right. And it's what it's been used as, I think, as well, is a platform and a lever for bad behavior.
Yes.
And it's let people and leaders off the hook. And my perspective has always been kind of even along the lines of with great power comes great, or with great power comes great responsibility,
Right.
is as a leader, once you get into a leadership position, you are no longer afforded the latitude to lose your shit.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
You can't lose your bearing. We
That's
call
right.
it military bearing.
Okay.
And there's a reason for it. Because if you're losing your crackers, then how is that ever going to inspire trust and confidence to those you lead? And it is only going to grow as it goes downhill, that then everybody you work for thinks that they can blow the handle off, and that doesn't affect people. So, and I think that part of authenticity and being authentic has been the piece of it that has been abused just beyond all pale. What I will say is that I think is really a struggle for people, and I would say even a lot of women in leadership positions are trying to get into that journey, is that we can tend to feel like we're in a double bind. Because when people say be authentic or just bring your true self to work, and I might have to talk through something a little bit more, or I feel like I need to solve a problem with more words, then people are like, oh, she's emotional. And then I'm like, okay, so then you do the I'll be very detached. And then you become an ice queen, because they're like, oh, she's non-responsive. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm already from the Midwest, so we're not super demonstrative.
Right.
Right? Unless we're one-on-one, we're pretty chill.
Yep.
So that authenticity, I believe, is that if you are able to maintain your bearing, right, your military bearing, stay comported, while you are still honoring your voice, your instincts, and your passions. And if you do that with integrity, you will never go wrong.
And you can do that with integrity when you stay in alignment with your values.
That's right. Well,
and hold on, you're right, because definition of values, right? That could go bad too.
You have a positive intent.
That's right, a positive intent. And I was just going to say, values that are based on universal principles.
That's right.
Not the latest trend, not the latest movement, but really true principles that have served thousands of years. When you can base your values on things that have worked over time, then, and stay in alignment with that, good things can happen.
I know. And in doing that, and in doing so, I think you'll bring a lot more people with you. And I do think that that's where the good leaders and the leaders I've worked with there are some who are amazing storytellers, and they've been able to figure out that narrative and share something that maybe it was something really boneheaded they did in their early 20s. And we got out of that one lucky. But that shows a little bit of a piece of their ability to take risks or make decisions. But then there are other people that are trying to figure out that narrative still, or we've also tangled up authenticity and vulnerability with that gives you permission to overshare. And when you're in a leadership position, I think there's a danger in that. You don't need to share everything.
Well, and this goes
there
to
are some conversations that should be amongst family and friends and close peers, not broadcast for the whole world to see.
I agree with that. And I think it does make me think of the chapter you wrote about ego, right? So, it was Ken Blanchard who's written the classic book. He's written like 40 books, but one of the classics was
he's amazing.
The 1 Minute Manager, right? Just an amazing guy. So he was on the show a few years ago, and what a awesome guy. He sent me I asked him if he would endorse my book. I sent him a copy of my book, and the next week I got 10 of his books back. I mean, just a class act.
That's
just
cool.
A cool guy. But he says about ego, he says, and this isn't a religious podcast, if you will, but he says, ego stands for edging God out. And so my only thought in reference to that is leaders need to stay humble. And when you let pride lead you, it usually doesn't lead to good things. It destroys trust. Let's be humble. Let's listen. Let's learn. Let's do those fundamental things that keep that connection with people is really important. So anyway,
I agree. And I think there's a fine line sometimes with people, and as a society in the US, I think we're not doing a fantastic job of this, that it almost feels like we've lost the ability to discern between confidence and arrogance.
Yeah, right.
And I actually think that's pretty important. And in part because, again, people have access to different channels right now that they can be broadcasting all the time, and they'll end up netting a lot of followers, if you will. And then those ideas of who's confident and yet who's competent gets all muddied, because they might just have a really big megaphone. And I know I personally am drawn towards the people who, yes, they're very confident. They work hard to continue to learn, and they come from a place of humility because they know whatever it is can be snatched away from them very quickly. And that's a pretty unique blend. So I consider myself really fortunate that I think I've got, a net full of friends, if you will, that operate in that space, and that aren't afraid to call me out on if they think something might be off, or they're like, why would you even think that? Or why would you say that? Or even support me in saying, I can't believe you're doubting yourself right now, because I can catastrophize something to death, right? I can be like, yeah, but what about this? And what about this? And they're like, no, go ahead.
And to be able to take that feedback and not become defensive. Right now in the culture, not to be too specific, but in the culture we live in, you can't even have differing opinions without one side just attacking you up and down.
Yeah. We're definitely on a precipice, and I think there are pockets of really good leadership. I think we have a few pockets of sound, not so reactionary, not so divisive voice making. But, I try to share with people, and again, I know all of your listeners are going to come from two different sides right now, if you will, politically and across the spectrum. I suggest to people right now, if they say, yeah, but what am I supposed to do right now? And I follow a wide variety of news sources, news outlets, whether it's international outlets, both sides of the media, if you will, from our end here in the US. But I tell people, change the channel for a full week. If you're a Fox watcher, go to a different channel for a week or a week and a half. If you never watch Fox for a week, or even open up on your laptop, MSNBC or CNN, put the BBC in the middle, if you will, and then put Fox on this side, and look at the different levers and ask yourself, why are they feeding me just this side? Or why is this story not even in this outlet? Because I think we're living in such a soundbite world right now that we've lost that ability to be a critical thinker. And not to make an excuse, the people who are, I would say, and I know we're going off topic a little bit, but I do think this is a leadership issue as well. And from a greatness perspective, how do we keep our country intact? When I was growing up, it was the mark of a good journalist that you did not know where their political persuasion was.
Oh, for sure. Oh, that's not the reality today.
You didn't know.
You know where people stand today. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's fascinating because perspective and context matters when you go, and you've traveled quite a bit. And I know I love when I go international and I'll watch CNN International, because it's like the news used to be.
Yes.
It's not.
That's right.
It's not slanted one way or another. Right. And I'm so fascinated by it. I feel like I'm a puppy sitting there with my head cocked going, why is it not like this at home?
Yeah.
Why is every channel not like this at home? So I think we just have to be really aware of, if we're trying to bring our teams and our companies or our families to a place more valuable than where we are right now. At the same time, we have to keep the aperture open and continue to learn. We have to be very cognizant from where it is we're getting our information. And that will allow us, I think, to get further faster than if we get locked into just one source.
I agree. I just wrote down here, for every listener, not you, for every listener, you will always find safety in universal values, in time-tested values. And even though the world is reactionary and all kinds of ideals and focuses are being spun around, number one, you don't need to jump into every conversation.
That's right.
There are many times I'll see something on the news that will cause my blood to boil, and I will write a post, and over 100 times I never post it. It's almost like I'm able to get it off my chest, acknowledge that I can see reality here without being delusionary, and then I just leave it alone because I don't think I need to jump in every conversation. And I think great leaders need to realize that as well. You don't need to jump into every conversation. You need to be open to differing views, and you need to collaborate, and you need to allow voices to be heard, and leaders need to be able to hear feedback from their people, but then base decisions based on their company values, which I would say most company values that they have in place are based on fundamental universal principles: trust, honesty, safety. We care for our people, right? Those are fundamental principles.
Yeah. The challenge is when we lose our way, right? And unfortunately, I think, and I talk about this, that, people think of accountability as a 4-letter word, and that we get very defensive. We don't want a different side. We don't want negative feedback. And that is from the rookie, the nugget, the first day on the job, to a lot of the most senior officers and board directors, right? The directors on boards. They don't tell me the negative news. I don't need to hear that. Or I don't want to hear what you think I'm doing wrong. And unfortunately, what happens then is it stops that ability to grow and get better. Now, your balance sheet might be showing a positive, but you have a trail of terror and tears in your path, right? So where are you going to be 10 years from now?
That's right. It'll eventually catch up. Exactly.
That's right. And whether that, and you may not see that dip in, and if we're talking large scale organizations, you may not see that dip in shareholder value or stock value. But I'll tell you what, there's a very real cost in probably your retention rate and the costs involved in bringing people on board all of the time. And so, it's interesting. We used really simple, straightforward processes to try to get better. One of those tools that we always used in aviation was debriefing. After every single flight, we took the time to debrief because we wanted to learn what worked, what didn't, and why. And those are both the good things and what we call Top Gun style others, right? So it's not goods and bads, it's goods and others.
Okay, got it.
Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to leave success to chance. And when we're all moving at this really, fast pace right now, and we're feeling overwhelmed and there's a lot of uncertainty, we get a project done and we move on to the next thing, or we hit a metric and we're on to the next workout plan, and we're just boom, boom, boom. But we're never really taking the time to be reflective, which means if we
celebrate.
If we stop doing any one of these things, then we're not going to be able to respond to changing market trends quickly. We're not going to be able to respond to competition. We're not going to be able to respond if we're athletes or high-performing physical individual people to physical challenges, because we've literally left success to chance. So there are things in play. I wish I'm on a couple of boards, and like I said, I get to coach a lot of good executives or highly placed executives. I wish more people took the time to debrief, because they would learn very quickly that within the debrief, when everybody is on board and we have that shared sense of purpose, the debrief is not about placing blame. Yes. It is not about who is right. It is about what is right. Yeah. And that can transform your company, your team, and your organization. And people can then show up their best versions of themselves, because they know they're going to learn. They know there's room in the system for some mistakes. Mistakes are going to happen, and we're going to keep moving forward.
That's right.
But people think accountability is a 4-letter word. And I think that's part of why we find ourselves where we are today, because it makes people defensive.
And it doesn't need to. I remember when I was speaking on stage with best-selling author Brian Tracy in Seattle, and I got up on stage and I was speaking and my suit jacket was open and I was on fire, right? I was having a great time. I went out to lunch with them afterwards. He said, TJ, it's not professional as a speaker to speak with your suit jacket open.
Oh.
That felt a little uncomfortable in that moment. But I got to tell you what, I immediately said to him, thank you for that feedback. Even though I didn't feel enthusiastic about it in the moment, my drive home, I interpreted that as, that's awesome. That is constructive. And ever since then, I've always, unless I'm in a small group where maybe there's only 30 people, but if I'm on a stage where I'm doing a keynote, my suit jacket is buttoned, right? And so—
Isn't that fascinating?
All I'm saying is, being married, I've been married for 23 years, and I know that I'm a better person because of my wife in my world, right? She pushes on things sometimes that I don't like, but that I recognize that makes me better. And instead of being defensive, take the information in and say, okay, there must be some truth in this. There must be something I can do a little bit better. And that goes back to just being humble. We talked about that. And It just seems like the leaders that I've worked with are very confident people, but they are also, you can be humble and confident at the same time.
Yes.
Right? They're coachable. They're willing to learn. Yes. They're willing to be better in the future. They're willing to apologize when they've made a mistake. And you think, they haven't allowed their pride to take over. So I know we're winding down in this interview, and I just feel like we have so much. I love your concept about wingman. You talked about Top Gun and how they really talked about the wingman philosophy or whatever, pointed it out. And you're like when you go back to our first question where I said, how can you be a leader without a title? You can be a leader by, as you said, by being an example. And that's what makes, correct me, step in here anytime. That's what makes a good wingman. Someone who's on your side, willing to support you, and may need to say some things that might hurt the ego just a little bit, but it's for the greater good. Any thoughts around wingman? Yeah.
Well, so just real quick on that, the other huge benefit and the value in having a really high quality set of wingmen around you or with you is that, we're just going to assume you both trust and believe in each other and the mission. But the critical nature of having a great wingman is that a wingman can cover your blind spot.
Yes.
And the reason, there are areas that none of us can see.
Yep.
That's why they're called blind spots.
Correct.
And the number of times I've even asked people when we delve into any of that material, even in big events, I'll ask people, does anybody in here think who in here doesn't think they have a blind spot? Invariably, a third of the hands will go up where people are like, no, I think I'm pretty wired. Like, I think I've got it. And I'm like, that is the definition of a blind spot.
That's exactly.
Because you can't see it.
Right.
So having a great wingman can not only provide you great emotional support, but helps cover those blind spots of things that you either, because you're so involved in what you're doing, you can't see, or from a performance or a personal perspective that they can kind of hold you back a little bit or go, I know this isn't your intent, but X, Y, Z, right? And that's the difference, as you know, and I know the people that you've been able to lead and chat with, that it's those strong relationships that have trust and mutual support and teamwork that are so critical, that we don't come into the relationship or the engagement with contempt.
Right.
And that is critical, because then if you and I have to work together and I know that we're aligned, we have those shared values, that you're not showing up with contempt, then I'll trust you.
That's right.
And we can collaborate effectively.
But that requires you as an individual to build a relationship with that person. You don't need to invite them over for dinner. We're not talking about that.
No.
But we're talking about finding out more about them. Tell me about your family. Tell me, right, just what are your goals, right? And it's not just a leader. It's when you can build it, when you think of customer service or you think of sales and you think of leadership, every one of those is about relationships, but you have,
Oh my gosh.
you
yes.
have to make it an intentional effort to build those relationships by asking questions, being curious, finding out more, going, oh, I never thought of it that way. Oh, that's totally different than the way I always imagined it, right?
Yes.
Which opens up an opportunity for more conversation, which leads me to say great leaders that I've met are comfortable with saying the phrase, I don't know.
Absolutely. I don't know compared with or in partnership with, if I tell you I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it.
100%
Follow
commitment.
up.
Yep.
Yep. I follow up, I follow through. And if I can't get it done or I can't meet that thing that I promised you, that deadline, I tell you as soon as I know I'm not going to be able to make it. I might even tell you the reason why. And I tell you, this is when I can get it to you, or it's going to be, and that is as soon as you realize you're not going to make something happen that you promised or that you said you were going to be able to do, you have to communicate that and not hide it and not make excuses for it, not cover it up, own your stuff, right? Say, I'm sorry. I totally forgot. I've been overwhelmed and honest to gosh, it fell off my radar and I'm a jackwagon.
Yep.
Can I get it to you tomorrow by 8? And then they're like, oh yeah, I totally forgot about it. But if you don't tell people, it's that follow up and that follow through that is so critical as well. And when one of the things that the Blue Angels are always amazing about, even in their debrief, at the end of every debrief, we go around, hey, this is what I saw. This is what I messed up. I can fix it.
Yes.
And what that does is it gives everybody at the table or in the debrief, everyone's like, all right, well, we don't have to, the elephant in the room's gone now, right?
Exactly.
Because and we're like, I can fix that. And it gives everybody in our team trust and confidence that you messed something up and that you're going to take action to fix it. And that, golly, that's so powerful.
It is so powerful.
So powerful.
Totally. And it takes confidence to do that.
Sure it does.
But I think that
you're hanging it out there.
You're hanging it out there, but that comes from a place of confidence to do it, but also a place of humility, which says, hey, it's a way of being honorable, right? And so, hey, I can improve in this. I'll get it done. Give me another shot. Okay.
And circling back to that wingman thing just for a second too, even organizationally, as soon as you know you're not going to do something and you tell people, it lets your whole team adjust.
Oh, right.
You say you're going to roll out a whole program and you don't, you better start telling people, or they're going to be the ones taking fire over it when everyone's like, where is this? Why isn't it done? And they're like, oh, I have no idea.
That's good.
So it gives your whole team a chance to go to plan B or go to plan C and adjust and hopefully still have a great outcome. So again, I mean, for you and I, we've been able to talk to lots of amazing people and you've done a ton of research, and it feels like some of this stuff should be table stakes because they're time-tested principles.
You would think, yeah.
And yet, in the chaos of all the shiny new things and people being overwhelmed, they're some of the first things that get dropped by the wayside. And then it adds up and it breaks down. It breaks down the system. It breaks down teamwork. It breaks down leadership channels. And it makes everything harder. It adds churn. It adds expense when none of it maybe had to be that way.
Comes down to the fundamentals, right? And sometimes we just get comfortable and we go on to autopilot and we forget about some of the fundamentals. And
complacency,
total.
Especially when you're successful.
Love it. The easier it is to be good, the more difficult it is to be great, right? And that's because of complacency. All right, listen, Carey, we could go on and on. I know we could.
I know. I should have brought a snack.
I know, right? So in your book, we won't go over it, but you have the 7 steps for leading yourself through adversity. So I invite everybody to go check that out in your book, Fearless Leadership. I'm going to have you do this first. How can people find you? What should they know about you in terms of your services? And maybe where can they find your book and so forth?
So you can find my book, Fearless Leadership, at all the main outlets, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, whatever the case may be, or go to your indie bookseller, tell them you want it, hook
Right.
them up because bookstores are amazing. And you can find me on all the social channels, just under Carey Lohrenz. I don't have any funky names.
Okay.
So Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm a little less on Facebook these days.
Okay.
More on probably Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram.
Okay.
So.
Got it. All right. Well, we'll put
And my website.
Yeah. And so what's your website? We'll put all this up. We'll put your Twitter,
it's-
all your social media that you just mentioned, and then what's the website?
Yeah, it's super easy. www.careylohrenz.com.
Okay.
CareyLoHrenz.com.
Awesome. As I've been reading your book and obviously visiting with you now, I just had this thought, my concept of greatness, your concept of fearless, right? Fearless leadership really are the same message. And the message is basically this to all the listeners, and any thoughts on this as we close, is it's not the fact that we're not going to feel fear from time to time. It's that we feel the fear and we do it anyway. And that's the key to life. It's stepping into that place and realizing that you can do it with the training, with the development, you can do it. And at some point you have to step into it. So go be fearless, go have that greatness within. My favorite quote of all time is George Lucas when he said, the founder or the creator of Star Wars, he said, we're all living in cages with the doors wide open. And the reality is, unless you're willing to step out, as you've very well talked about, articulated in the show, is unless you're willing to step out into that unknown, unless you're willing to land on that aircraft carrier when it's totally pitch black outside and trust that your training will come through, it's never going to happen for you. So you've got to go into it with sort of a fearless spirit. Any last thoughts there?
Yeah, I would say two things just really quick. There was a study that was done, and it was years ago, that people there was a researcher who put electrodes to watch people's heart rates when they were jumping out of airplanes. And the highest their heart rate was right before they jumped out of the airplane. Not when their little pink bodies were hurtling towards possible death. Outside of the airplane, right before they jumped. And so I try to remind myself, even when I'm teetering on, feeling like I might be paralyzed by fear or feeling like I'm too scared to do something or too intimidated, that just understand physiologically and psychologically, action conquers fear. And bold, fearless action is what is going to be required.
Love that.
That's it.
Well said. That's awesome. Thank you for being on the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. I really appreciate it.
TJ, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You bet. All right. Podcast listeners, thanks for listening. You've taken time out of your schedule, and I really appreciate it. Now, do me a favor. If you like what you heard, star it. Thanks. Now go unleash your greatness within.
GreatnessWithin.com.